We will only post the fiscal part of the discussion. Everything else will just be for internal use for our note taking. I'm hoping that will not discourage people from sharing in any way, but obviously you have the option to pass as we call on you, so that's not really a problem. First of all, today we are going to tackle we're going to start by talking mostly to those of you who are renewal grantees. We're going to talk about, I'm going to have Sherry Harman talk about the carryover, the budget modification process, amendment process, carryover balance, and no cost extension, and some of the things you need to keep in mind as you're deciding what to do or how to do that. We'll then talk to those of you who are not renewal grantees, who are going to have a chance to hear very little right now about the new competition that will be coming up for you. And then we're going to swing over to a brief conversation about the annual convening in November, which will be in person. And then wrap up with time, hopefully, to hear from a number of you, many of you, related to the questions that I posed in the email. I've asked folks to feel free to use the chat as you go along. As you hear things, you can pop in your questions, comments, suggestions. If we don't get to answer, if there's questions and we don't get to answer them on today's call, we will answer them in an email afterwards as a group email, kind of a Q&A document. When we do have the sharing, there will be an opportunity both to use the chat as well as to take yourself off of mute. It looks like everybody's on mute right now, which is great. And then, of course, if you have something to say when we're getting into discussion, you can take yourself off mute and speak. So we're hoping we'll hear from some of you as well. So before we get underway, I just want to check and see if you have any initial questions, things you want us to cover that I didn't mention. Put it in the chat now, and we can be considering that as we're talking, in case there's any topics that you want to make sure we cover in our federal sharing with you. Having said that, I'm going to ask Sherry Harman to come off mute and to introduce herself. There's some of you who may not have met her before, and she can introduce herself. And we're going to start the conversation with some of the fiscal pieces that we want to remind you of and alert you to. Sherry, are you available? Sherry, we can't hear you.
You're on mute. I'm sorry. I have this terrible habit of double muting myself. I was saying good morning or good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sherry Harman. I am the grants management specialist that works with the PDG Birth to 5 grants. So today, Richard asked me to speak to you all briefly about some of the actions that we're working on right now, and to remind you about the budget revision amendments and kind of when they're required. So to start out, a budget revision amendment is required anytime that your agency needs to shift funds between those cost categories. So personnel fringe, travel, supplies, contractual, you get the idea. Anytime you want us to move funds between those categories in an amount that exceeds $250,000. The HHS grants policy statement also says, or 25% of the total budget, whichever is less, you all receive at least $1 million. So we'll just simplify it and say, anytime you're moving funds of $250,000 or more between those budget categories, a budget revision amendment is required. I would also add that if you are proposing a change in scope, so adding any kind of new activity that was never included in any of your applications, that also requires prior approval. So that would also require an amendment. So again, you get your initial grant based on your competitive application, and then we have our non-competing continuation applications that are submitted for each year after that. If you're proposing an activity that was never included in any of those applications, you do need to submit that amendment to get that approval for the new activity. So that's budget revisions. I know like right now we are working on several carryover balances or carryover requests. So this is when you have an unobligated balance at the end of a budget period and you want to request to move those funds into the next budget period to continue using those funds, again, for activities that have been approved, previously approved in one of your applications, or at least within the scope of that application. So with a carryover request, you may be shifting funds between activities that were already approved. So maybe you don't need as much in one activity and you need more in another. You can include that in your carryover request. That's not, we don't need a separate budget revision for that. But again, if you're proposing something that is a change in scope, that is something new that hasn't been proposed before, or if it exceeds the $250,000 threshold, then we do need a budget revision to make that approval first. The carryover request, we need to have the approved annual SF 425 federal financial report in PMS. That's how we verify that unobligated balance. So we do need to have that annual report submitted in PMS before you submit your carryover request in Grant Solutions. And then your carryover request will include a budget narrative with the breakout of the costs by cost category and also by activity. So we want to see both from a budget perspective and the program perspective of what you're intending to use those carryover funds for. And then what we do is we just kind of compare it to your previous application and make sure, again, like I said, that it's within the scope of your previous application, so that there isn't anything completely brand new being proposed. Then no cost extensions. So this is when we get to the end of the project period. So the end of the last budget period within the grant. Since we don't have another budget period to carry over any unobligated balance, there's the option to request an extension. So in this case, we do request that there are no changes in scope during that extension period. So the purpose of the extension is to allow you additional time to complete activities that were already approved. So once that extension period starts, we're not going to, we don't anticipate any kind of budget revisions at that point. So if you do need to make any of those changes, please make sure that you make them before the end of the original budget period. So, if we're looking at December 30th of 2022, up until that time, you can make those changes. If you're then requesting an extension beyond that period or that date to continue or complete activities, then we want to know exactly what activities are going to be completed during that time. And we're not anticipating any changes, just that you need more time to complete those activities. No cost extension request. In there, we want to see, again, like what activities do you need an extension for? So having, just kind of maybe a chart or something that shows what activities you're working on, maybe the status of what their current status is, when you anticipate being able to complete them. And then we should see whatever that date is. You can request up to 12 months for an extension. If you don't need 12 months, then you can request 6 months or 8 months or whatever you need. But do make sure that you have enough time to complete everything. And then the 90-day liquidation period is added to the end the same way it is for each of the budget periods. So you still have that 90-day period to pay all of the obligations. I think that's all I have. Richard, did I miss anything, or does anyone
I think you did.
Questions?
I think you did great. I do have some information to share though, because I may have caused some confusion. I'm glad that I had a conversation with Sherry yesterday, because she actually helped give you guys more flexibility than I was willing to give you. As you know, several of you were requesting to have some idea of would you be getting a no-cost extension for at the end of the year. And we finally put out a notice. We were able to put out a notice much earlier than we normally would. So we argued that the pandemic has caused all kinds of issues, challenges with spending, which is true. We argued that people are starting to lose staff who are concerned that they won't have a job to do next year. And so we were able to put out a notification to you that you would be able to submit a no-cost extension at any time after your carryover balance was approved and processed and your first quarterly fiscal report had been submitted. And here's where I or one of the FPOs may have confused you with information that I told them, because I was under the impression, and I have actually cautioned some of you, to not submit your no-cost extension request until closer to the end of the year, unless you have to do so. And that makes sense to me, because I'm not quite sure how you would know what to ask for a no-cost extension for if you're submitting it in May or June, since so much time is elapsing. So I guess I would say normally, so what I said to many of you was, if you put in a no-cost extension request now, you won't be able to make any changes afterwards. And what Sherry was able to clarify with me is that since the no-cost extension does not go into effect until the end of the budget period, which in your case would be December 30th for most of you, April 29th of next year for Kansas, Nebraska, and South Carolina, the reality is you can put in a no-cost extension request, and you can still then make budget revisions, budget amendment requests up until December 30th. So some of what I said was incorrect. So we wanted to make sure we could correct that now. It means if you put in a no-cost extension request now, you would put in your best guess of what you won't be able to obligate or complete by the end of the year. And then if, as you got closer to the end of the year, you realized that you needed to move money around a little bit more consistent with your approved scope of work, you could do so, put in that request, and that could be approved, and it would not affect your no-cost extension. Once you get to December 31st, your no-cost extension kicks in, and at that point, you can no longer do a budget amendment. So first, I want to check and see, Sherry, did I get that right? Or do you need to clarify anything I said? And then second, we can see if folks have questions, and I can look at some of the comments or questions that may have come in the chat as well.
Yes.
Sherry, did I get that right?
You did get that correct.
Okay.
So I do see that there's some questions in chat. So I'm just going to go through those. From Tilneal Gary. We don't have changes in scope, but we want to clarify, if we get a no-cost extension approved early, we cannot make changes. So that's what Richard was just addressing. So when you're looking at what the original budget period is, I would say you could make changes until the end of that budget period, because the no-cost extension is in effect after the end of that budget period. So what we do want to see, though, again, we don't usually approve no-cost extensions this early, but we did see that there are some major concerns with losing staff or just contracts and things like that. So we did discuss it with our team and decided that we could consider it early. So what we want to see is just an explanation of why are you requesting it now as opposed to at the end of the year. But yes, for the normal budget period, you can make those changes, requests for a change in scope or budget revision. But once that extension period starts, so after December 30th or after April 29th for the other three, then we would not expect to see any changes. Devin Camarota, is the 90-day period on top of the 12-month extension or within the 12. So the 90-day liquidation period is always after the end of the period of the budget period. So it would be in addition. So after the end of the budget period, so you need to incur costs during the budget period. So for most of you, the budget period ends on December 30th. So you have to incur costs in that time frame. And then you have 90 days from December 30th or 31st through March 30th to liquidate those obligations. So pay the invoices and all of that. Lindsay Dorneman, your name's cut off. So there are certain projects that we expect to complete. Pending, you know, some of these projects require.
While you're reading that, I'm going to answer another question. So the deadline for submitting a no-cost extension is at least 2 weeks before the end of the budget period. So you can go as late as, let's say, December. I'll say December 10th. I don't know what actually 2 weeks is, but taking in the holidays, you want to submit it no later than early December, so that we have enough time to process it. But you can submit it any time from the point you have your carryover balance process and you have your fiscal, at least your first quarterly report submitted. Go ahead, Sherry.
Mm-hmm. So this is kind of complicated. The carryover would be requested before the no cost extension. So realistically, when you're submitting your carryover request, you don't have that 18 or 24 month period. You have the 12 months. So your carryover request should just be focused on, you know, what you're going to continue in that 12 month period. But by default, once we receive your no cost extension, if that is approved for an extended period of time, you then have that additional time to do that work. So it's kind of a confusing, I guess,
yeah, no, prospect, I think that's a good answer, Sherry. And I would say, Lindsay, if you need further clarification, you can send an email directly to Sherry, since that's a very specific question that may not be relevant for everybody.
And then Lois Thawley, for the no cost extension, do states need obligations in place, or can we use the additional time to finalize procurements and complete the work? Again, this is a little tricky. So a no cost extension cannot be requested simply for the purpose of using an unobligated balance. So we're kind of, you know, balancing a fine line here. You know, you have to be able to demonstrate that this activity was always an intended part, I guess, of your plan. So you can continue to make obligations once the extension is approved, but we do need to have some explanation that helps us to know that you're not just adding on these other things because there's money left over, if that makes sense. So these items were always part of the scope of the initial application or part of your plan, not something that you're doing just to use up those unobligated funds.
So I'm going to skip. Devin had a follow-up question. So you're correct, Devin, that the question was, so if you request a no-cost extension at the end of the year, you have up to 12 months. You may not need all 12 months, but you have up to 12 months. And then you have a 90-day liquidation period, which would land you in March 2024. So that is correct. I'm going to hold off. So the expectations for final reporting, I think I'm going to hold off answering that for now, because I think we want to do a little bit more discussion about that, because I want to give an answer that's related to fiscal reporting and programmatic reporting. So we'll send you something related to that. The no-cost extension will include a projection, of course. As I move through this year, I'll need to submit actual numbers, likely through an amendment. That's kind of a statement, but it's a question. So yes, that's correct. You're doing a projection of costs. And then as you go through the year and you find, particularly if you find you needed to move more than 250,000, then you would do an amendment request, as long as it happens prior to the end of the budget period. So you'd want to get it in again by early December for most of you. There are a number of other questions. I think I'm going to hold off answering them and answer them in the interest of time. We'll answer all of your questions, but not on this call, I don't think. Unless you see something, Sherry, as you're going through this, if you see something else you think we need to answer, we can always come back and reintroduce you to the group if you see anything here that you think is important to answer right away.
Okay.
So thank you, Sherry. I'm hoping that's helpful to everybody. The point I guess I wanted to make is that obviously, if you're going to put in a no-cost extension request, you've done your carryover request, you've gotten your budget, you did your you want to make sure you do a budget amendment request before the carryover request if it was more than 250,000. And then once you have the carryover request processed, you want to make your best guess at what you're going to need to no cost extension for. You have time to make adjustments until the end of the year, which is different than I told some of you. So that's good news. And then if necessary, you may need to do another budget amendment prior to the end of the fiscal year, the budget year. And then once the no cost extension period begins, there are no more amendments. So I hope that is helpful to most of you. What I want to do is shift the conversation now to those of you who are on the call and those of you who are not on the call, who are not renewal grantees. There is going, because of what Congress appropriated in funding, there is going to be two competitions this year. One very small competition for the states and territory that has not previously received any PDG funding. So that would be Tennessee, West Virginia, South Dakota, and American Samoa. Those will be the only entities eligible for an initial grant. And then anybody else who had an initial grant but did not get a renewal grant will be eligible to apply for a renewal grant, which will be targeted for 3 years, but of course is based on additional funding each year. We don't have any details yet, other than all we can tell you right now is that it will be consistent with what you saw before, but not the same because time has passed. We've learned some things. We will need to put the NOFO or the Notice of Funding Opportunity out sometime before September, before mid-September. We have to make the awards by the end of December. So the awards have to be made by December 31st. And we don't know how long it'll take to get our funding announcements through the clearance process in both departments so that it can be posted. So for right now, it could happen July, August. It might come out in September. Can't come out much later than September if we're going to give you the 60 days to write your application. And then we will award by the end of December. There's really not any more I can share with you at this point because all of that analysis is being done and the redrafting of the funding announcements. But you will get more information. If you have questions about anything I've just said, you can include it in the chat. And stay tuned. We'll make sure that that each state who does not presently have a renewal grant receives the information that I've just shared with you.